Hey guys, what's going on? Got another Enhancement Shaman video here, and what I'm going to do is break down the talent tree for enhancement and how the talents actually work, because I feel like a lot of people are maybe confused or not sure on how the talents actually work and want to learn more. So that is my plan, and I'm going to do this to the best of my ability, explaining the talents, going over each one for the most part, and just showing what they do as well. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at mastery and damage types that we deal because this is very important and there's a lot. So for our mastery, it is a bit different kind of to others. So the first part is increases the chance to trigger Stormbringer and Wind Fury weapon by 2.92%. So technically, this is actually incorrect. There is not in the sense of the percentage, but the name. So it actually increases the chance to trigger Storm Surge. So Stormbringer is the old name. So that's a little Easter egg thing that you can yell at Blizzard about. But so it has a chance to increase Storm Surge and Wind Fury trigger chance. This means your Wind Fury is going to trigger more often, so rather than the base 27% or something, I think it is, it's now 32. And for Storm Surge, it's the same thing where your Storm Strike has a chance to reset, or all of your attacks essentially have a chance to reset your Storm Strike ability, giving it increased damage if you have certain talents. And then it just adds in additional elemental damage, increasing all fire, frost, and nature damage. This part is very important for later on just because majority of our damage is elemental style, but Storm Strike and Wind Fury are our only physical damage dealers. That is very important to remember. So, now that that's over, what damage types do we do? Now, we have, I believe it's 8 different damage types. The first one is going to be physical damage, so that is our Storm Strike and our Wind Fury. So that's pretty basic, not buffed by our mastery. And then we have fire, which is Flame Shock, Lava Lash, you know, those abilities, Lava Burst even, but we don't typically use that. And then we have nature, which is our Lightning Bolt, our Chain Lightning, our Crash Lightning, and I think that's it, and lightning shield if you want to consider it. Other than that, I think that's it for nature spells. But yeah, on to frost. We then have frost strike, and we have ice strike as well, and hailstorm. So those are the primary ones. And then we get into the multi types, which is storm strike damage. So that'll be like our doom winds and our primordial storm, which basically means it deals or it gets modified by both nature and physical damage. And then we have Frost Strike, which is frost damage and physical damage combo, which is also Primordial Storm. It seems to be our only ability that has that. And then we have Flame Strike, which is fire and physical damage, which is our Sunder, Primordial Storm, even Fire Nova as well. It'll be important. And then our Totem for Surging Totem. And then we have elemental damage, which is elemental blast. Elemental damage takes all modifiers from any type, so fire, frost, or nature, and puts it in, or consumes it, sorry, and applies even more damage to this ability. But if you have something that does like 25% damage to both fire and frost, I don't think it double dips, but I could be wrong on that. I don't believe it does because it's a weird interaction to have the same ability combo twice into this thing. So I'm not exactly sure, but it'll, yeah, I don't know. If somebody wants to do testing on that, go for it. But yeah. So yeah, we have 8 different types of damage effects. So this comes into very important when we have our abilities and stuff like that, such as Legacy of the Frost Witch, our Feral Spirits and stuff like that. All that does damage modifiers to elements and physical, so it can get confusing. And when you see all these different damage types, you might be wondering what's what. So let's get into our talents now. Now that that's over, we can get into our talents. Let's go over the first one, which is Maelstrom. So Maelstrom on its own actually only reduces the cast time of our ability, such as Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Elemental Blast, Lava Burst, technically Primordial Storm. We'll get into that later. But yeah, so what it does on its own, if this was your only talent, you didn't have these three, it would only reduce the cast time of your ability. And that would actually stack to 5 times. Once you reach 5, you couldn't get any more, and you'd be able to instant cast. So this is our resource. This is what is generated every time we deal any form of weapon damage, essentially. So if you Lava Lash, you Storm Strike, you Auto Attack, you Crash Lightning, anything that requires your weapon, it will have a chance to trigger Maelstrom. And Wind Fury is also included in this, and Sunder, I think, is as well. But on top of that, Sunder does trigger Wind Fury, which generates even more, and so on and so forth. So anything that is essentially striking with your weapon, you have a chance to generate Maelstrom, no matter what. If it strikes with your weapon, you have a chance to generate Maelstrom. So then we go into the next talent, which is Improved Maelstrom Weapon. This is what causes the increased damage. So it increases the damage or healing of your next spell by 20% per stack. So this goes up to 100% once you reach 5 stacks. So at 5 stacks, your next Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Healing Surge, Elemental Blast will deal double damage essentially. And then we go into further Raging Maelstrom. This increases how many stacks we can generate at once. So this means rather than just going to 5 and you keep spamming Storm Strike and you're not going to generate anymore, this will allow you to generate up to 10. So that way you're not wasting as much. So when you cast something, you could cast technically twice. But at the same time, it's increasing how much damage that spell does by 5% per stack. So this makes it 125% at 5 stacks. So now you're dealing double or 2.25% more damage, or 2.25 times more damage with your next ability. And then we get into the talent that really broke Maelstrom, allowing us to consume 10 stacks at once. So this allows us to cast a spell at 250% additional power. So that's 3.5 times. That is basically casting an ability 3.5 times. So technically, it's casting a 5 stack twice, but yeah, you can see where I'm getting at, where Maelstrom goes kind of crazy. So this is why Maelstrom has become important. Although in this season, season 2, Maelstrom has lost its power just a little bit because our generators have seen a significant buff. So you've probably noticed that it's not technically full priority, but it's definitely up there, and you will notice those big elemental blasts or even lightning bolts or tempests. So yeah, that's a big reason why, is because we're casting at 250% increased damage every time we use 10 stacks. But what else gets modified by our Maelstrom? Well, we have an ability called pardon me, Legacy of the Frost Witch. After consuming 10 stacks of Maelstrom, it resets the cooldown of Storm Strike and increasing our physical and frost damage by 25%. This is a really, really big talent, and it was recently buffed at 1 rank. But why is this so good? Well, because we're constantly casting our Maelstrom. Now, in order to proc this, you don't have to technically cast 10 stacks every time. You just have to consume 10 stacks at a certain amount, right? Or at a certain time. So if you want to, you could just send abilities at 10 stacks and always proc it, guarantee the proc. Or if you're struggling to generate, you could cast one at 5 and then another one at 5. And after that second cast, you will gain the Legacy of the Frost Witch buff. So you don't have to worry about constantly spending 10 at a time. You can spend 5 and 5, 7 and 3, or whatever, as long as you get to 10 stacks eventually. It's just like a countdown number where once you consume this amount, you gain the buff. So, what else is modified by Maelstrom? Well, we do have an ability called Deeply Rooted Elements, where each stack of Maelstrom you spend, you have a chance to proc Ascendance. So this makes spending 10 stacks more of a priority because that is going to be your biggest chance to proc Ascendants. Now, this talent is not used very often, but it is something to keep in mind, and that's what makes it a priority to cast 10. The same goes for our tier set, which is every time you consume a stack of Maelstrom, you have a percent chance to remove your winning streak and gain Doom wins. So that means we want to be casting Maelstrom at its maximum value, giving us a 10% chance to remove winning streak rather than, let's say, a 5%. So it's basically doubling our percent chance to gain our Doom wins. That's very important. And that's why you want to aim for spending 10 stacks. And then we get into our hero talents. So these are a bit more on the damagey side rather than affecting Maelstrom itself. It's more like Maelstrom affects them. So first with Totemic, we have Totemic Rebound. So Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, and Lava or Elemental Blast, have a chance to unleash a Surging Bolt at your Surging Totem, increasing your totem's damage by 10%, and then redirecting the bolt at your target for amount of nature damage. So every time you deal damage with one of your Maelstrom abilities, you have a chance to deal nature damage and increase the damage of your totem. This is also combined with our Whirling Elements, where it's automatically gain 3. But basically, this is just a passive, and this also increases the value of Maelstrom because your totem is actually doing quite a bit of damage thanks to certain other talent combos, increasing the damage of your Earth Surge, essentially, which we'll get into later. But that's another thing that is buffed. And then we can go over to Stormbringer, where we have unlimited power, where spending Maelstrom gives you a big burst of haste. Multiple applications may overlap. That means if you spend 10 Maelstrom, you get a 10% haste buff. And then if you do it again, you could technically get 20% haste buff if you do it within like 3 seconds or whatever. You get a quick 20% haste buff. It just constantly stacks up and up and up and up. So the faster you go, the faster you're going, right? So you just keep on gaining Maelstrom. And then you have where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Um oh yeah, it's just itself, Tempest. Right. Every 40 Maelstrom stacks you spend replaces your lightning bolt with Tempest. This is just a glorified lightning bolt, essentially. So what this means is after spending 40 Maelstrom, kind of like the way you generate your Legacy of the Frost Witch, doesn't matter how you get there. Once you spend 40, you gain Tempest. That's essentially what it's saying. And it's just like a big burst of damage. You do have your Awakening Storms, where Storm Strike, Lightning Bolt, and Chain Lightning have a chance to strike your target for a bit of additional damage. And every 4 times this happens, it gives you Tempest. So this also increases the value of Lightning Bolt for storm builds because Lightning Bolt has a chance to give you more Tempests. That's why it ends up being more priority. And also you do have a few other talents. But that's basically everything Maelstrom modifies or has a kind of like an interaction with. But other than that, there ain't much else to it other than just the way it is generated and stuff like that. And Primordial Storm is a very unique interaction with Maelstrom because you technically don't need Maelstrom weapon stacks to cast it. It only increases its damage. Primordial Storm is the only spell like that because it's already instant cast. Anyways, let's go on to the next one. Okay, on to Lavalash. This is Totemic's favorite button, and probably the button you will be pressing 90% of the time. So what does it do? Well, it deals a bit of fire damage, but it's also increased by Flame Tongue weapon being imbued to your offhand, which it generally should be because that's where it goes. This is the strongest button Enhance has, most likely. Uh, the reason being is because it's modified by 8, 9 talents. It's insane. So, Molten Assault is the first talent, reducing its cooldown and causing Flame Shock to be spread and refreshed on your primary target. So you can see You don't once you have Flame Shock active, you don't have to worry about it because you're just going to be lava lashing and it's going to refresh and apply it to all nearby enemies. So you always want to make sure your target is flame shocked. So that way it's constantly refreshing and spreading. Onto the primary reason why it's so powerful is Hot Hands. Melee auto attacks with Flame Tongue weapon active have a 5% chance to reduce the cooldown of Lava Lash by 75% and the damage by 40% for 6 seconds. So this is triggered by anything that really does Flame Tongue damage. So like Storm Strike, Crash Lightning, Sunder, all those have a chance to trigger this. Anything that really does flame tongue damage will cause your hot hands to activate randomly. This is the main reason because it just allows you to spam Lava Lash, which comes into more reason why it's so powerful is Ashen Catalyst. Each time Flame Shock does periodic damage, it increases the damage of your next Lava Lash by 8% up to 64 and reduces the cooldown of Lava Lash by half a second. So this allows you to just spam it even when Hot Hands isn't active. And you can see the modifier on your Lava Lash itself. You can see that number going up, up, and up, and then it just further increases the damage. Very helpful. On to the next one, which is Lashing Flames. So this one is only used in single target. Reason being is you get more value out of mass AoE by not having this because Flame Shock is hard stuck 6 targets. So Lava Lash and Sundering increases the damage of your Flame Shock on its target by 100%. This only applies to the dot effect, not the initial effect. So you have to keep that in mind. But basically, it causes Flame Shock to do even more damage. And also, actually, I think it does apply to the dot effect. I might be wrong on that. Let's check it out. So Flame Shock 64, we Lava Lash, we get Flame Shock back, and then we get 65 knock. Yeah, so it does apply to everything it does, but it doesn't work with Voltic Blaze. Um, but yeah, so this causes your Flame Shock to just deal double damage essentially. You would think this would be really helpful in mass AoE, but it turns out that it's not, which does suck. But on to the next set of talents, which is more in the hero tree. So our totemic tree. What exactly causes it to do so much damage? Well, Lively Totems is the first one. Lava Lash has a chance to summon a Searing Totem to hurl Searing Bolts at the enemy for a set amount of fire damage for 8 seconds. Frost Shocks, empowered by Hailstorm, Lava Lash, and Fire Nova, cause your Searing Totems to shoot a Searing Volley at the target for 5 enemies, or for a bunch of damage at 5 enemies. So this is just a nice little passive. Every time you Lava Lash, you have a chance to spawn a totem. While that totem's active, Lava Lashes not only have a chance to spawn an additional totem, but each one of those Lava Lashes is sending a volley of damage to 5 targets. Kind of crazy. But then we get on to the massive reason, which is reactivity. While Hot Hands is active, Lava Lash shatters the earth, causing a sundering at 50% effectiveness. Sundering from this effect does not incapacitate. So, not only does reactivity trigger sundering, which is a massive flame strike build or ability that causes wind furies and flame tongues, it also triggers our Earth Surge, which is our next talent. Casting Sundering within 40 yards of your Surging Totem causes it to create a tremor at 100% effectiveness. Now, reactivity does not trigger this effect at 100%. It triggers it at, I believe, 50 or 30%, something like that. So you'll notice that's why your AoE damage is insane. But on top of that, we have Imbuement Mastery. Now, this is a maybe we'll save that for when we go for Wind Fury actually. So let's get into this. So Lava Lash, we want to see what exactly this looks like. So you can see my Surging Totem is over here, and then we Lava Lash, we trigger Hot Hands. You can see the Sunder effect, and you can see my totem is doing damage despite being all the way over here. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? To see that. It really does do some crazy things. And then while the totem is still up, I can sunder. It causes the area effect to go crazy. So we bring it back out, we sunder, boom. Then we do it again, boom. You can see the little AoE effect right there that's happening. That is your totem going off at your position. So that is one of the reasons why, and plus it deals flame strike damage, so it's amplified by a whole bunch of different modifiers. But yeah, that's a big reason why this build goes crazy is because each lava lash not only triggers the totem, it triggers your surging totem as well as just doing massive amounts of damage, and Sunder does damage on its own. That's why Lava Lash is insane for this build. So now on to our next talent, which is going to be Wind Fury Weapon. So this is an imbuement, not necessarily a spell that you're going to be casting. You basically cast it at either the start of a fight or at the start of a dungeon or whatever, and it lasts an hour. It's just a buff to your weapon. So what does it do? Well, it imbues your main hand weapon with the element of wind. Each main hand attack has a 32% chance to trigger 3 extra attacks, dealing physical damage each. So this basically allows your weapon to strike multiple times, which is caused by any form of weapon strike. So that means your Sunder, your Crash Lightning, your Storm Strike, but not your Lavlash. Anything that deals main hand weapon. Lavlash is strictly offhand, so that means it does not trigger Wind Fury. But we still get a lot of effects out of it because of Sunder and stuff like that. So our first talent with Wind Fury is going to be Forceful Winds. This basically increases the damage of multiple Wind Fury attacks within a certain amount of time. So within 15 seconds, you can get up to 5 stacks, increasing the damage by 15% per stack. Now, the stacks do not refresh the duration. So once you reach 5 stacks, that is it until the 15 seconds are up. Once the 15 seconds are up and you trigger a Wind Fury, the stacks start again. So you will notice that you don't have to pay attention to this talent very much, and it's just basically a passive. You don't have to worry about it. And then we have Unruly Winds, which just causes your Wind Fury to do a third attack rather than just 2. So the original design is 2 attacks rather than 3. But generally, you should have Unruly Winds because we want Doom Winds. And speaking of Doom Winds, that is our next talent. This is a big cooldown and also part of our tier set. What does it do? Unleash a devastating storm around yourself, dealing storm strike damage, which we talked about at the very start. So it's modified by both nature and physical effects, causing damage every second to nearby enemies for 8 seconds. But also, it increases the chance to activate Wind Fury weapon by 200% and increases the damage by 10%. So when it says activate chance increase by 200%, that doesn't guarantee you a proc. So technically, it is increasing the chance to proc Wind Fury by 3 times. So if I go ahead and Doom Winds, oh, right there, I now have a 98% chance to trigger Wind Fury, which is basically a guaranteed chance. But let's say we have a 5%, that means we're only going to have a 15% chance to trigger Wind Fury. So Doom Winds does not guarantee that you're going to proc Wind Fury, it's just increasing your base percent by 3 times. So it basically guarantees it, but not technically. And then we have another one called Storm's Wrath. This kind of works the same as what we have here. So increases the chance for mastery enhanced elements to trigger Wind Fury and Storm Surge by 150%. So if you take this talent, so I am at, let's say, 7.9% chance to trigger our bonus. So, or 2.9% chance to trigger or increase trigger chance. Sorry for the struggle. So 2.9%, we're going to take our Storm's Wrath and we're going to see this number get increased. Should be, yep. So we now have a 7.3%. So basically, it's taking that and increasing it by 2.5 times. So that is basically what this talent is doing. It's very, very helpful for single target and even AoE in most cases. Reason being is it causes Wind Fury to proc a lot. In this build, we don't really care about Storm Surge because we don't Storm Strike very often, but we do want Wind Fury proccing a significant amount. And then we get on to the reason why Wind Fury is so important in AoE, and that is Imbuement Mastery from our hero talent. So this increases the chance Wind Fury weapon will trigger by 5% and increases its damage by 8%. But the bonus effect is when Flame Tongue weapon triggers from Wind Fury weapon attacks, it has a chance to whirl a flame around the target, dealing 300% of its damage to all nearby enemies. This does not have a cap to it. So this ability goes kind of crazy, and that's why you'll notice Flame Tongue is up there. But on top of that, Wind Fury is modified by all physical damage effects, which we will get into once we go over cooldowns. But that is the big thing that is going to happen, and that is why Wind Fury is very important. Also, each one of these strikes has a chance to generate Maelstrom, so it does go kind of crazy. But the biggest thing is because it triggers Flame Tongue, causing massive AoE damage. And each one of your Sunder hits, essentially, because Sunder is a frontal cone in a way. Every time you strike with this, you have a chance to trigger Wind Fury as well. Although I think your Lavlash technically does have a chance to Wind Fury because it's going to trigger Sunders when it's hot hands. But yeah, that is all the talents for Wind Fury. So now we can get into our cooldowns at the very end. So our first cooldown is going to be Primordial Wave. And if you are wondering about Storm Strike, we will get into that at the end. It's just more part of Stormbringer. So Primordial Wave is a newly changed ability for Season 2. Basically, it works around Flame Shock as well. So what exactly does it do? Well, it targets anything with your Flame Shock within 40 yards, and it auto targets. Don't worry about that. And you cannot cast it without a Flame Shock active either. And it just blasts the enemy with significant elemental damage, generating 5 Maelstrom. So this works really, really well with its further talents, which Splintered Elements, pardon me. Primordial Wave grants you 10% haste plus 4% for each additional target it blasts by Primordial Wave for 12 seconds. So your initial target grants you 10%, and then each target after that, up to 5, because you can only have 6 targets flame shocked, you get 4% additional haste per target. So this is a massive buff. And then we go into what it turns into afterwards. Primordial Wave transforms into a single use of Primordial Storm for 15 seconds after it casts. Now, what does Primordial Storm do? Well, it devastates nearby enemies with a Primordial Storm, dealing a bunch of Flame Strike damage, a bunch of Frost Strike damage, and a bunch of Storm Strike damage at the same time, while at the end of it, unleashing a Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning at 150% effectiveness based on how many targets you hit with the ability, and it deals reduced damage. And it also consumes Maelstrom, like we talked about. So this is our big cooldown, and the reason why is because Primordial Storm hits like a truck. And the reason for it is because it combos really well with Feral Spirits, because Feral Spirits gives us increased physical damage, and it triggers Frost Witch at the same time, giving us physical damage and frost damage at 25%. So that is one reason why Primordial Wave is such a big cooldown. Not only does it generate a significant amount of Maelstrom instantly, gives you a big burst of haste, so that's why you feel really, really fast after you Primordial Wave, and then the ability causes a massive amount of physical and elemental damage. But at the same time, this ability triggers Wind Fury weapon and Flame Tongue weapons. So that is why it goes insane. Not only does the ability itself trigger massive amounts of damage, it combos really well with Doom Winds because each target it hits has a chance to trigger Wind Fury weapon. So that's why you'll see Primordial Storm just explode for a bajillion amounts of damage. So yeah, that is just one of the coolest abilities they have ever brought to shamans in general. Now on to our next cooldown, which is going to be Feral Spirits. So as I said earlier, it gives us physical damage. So Feral Spirits are basically pets that we summon to deal a little bit of physical damage, but also grant us an ability, which increases our physical damage dealt by our abilities and passives and stuff like that. But on top of that, Feral Spirits being active causes us to generate Maelstrom weapon immediately and 1 stack every 3 seconds for 15 seconds. So this means we get 6 stacks of Maelstrom just for summoning our feral spirits on their own. But then we go into our bonus talents, which is Witch Doctor's Ancestry, which works significantly well with Maelstrom Weapon and high generation of it. Increases the chance to gain a stack of Maelstrom Weapon by 4%. So this means we have more chance every time we strike something to gain Maelstrom. And whenever you gain a stack of Maelstrom Weapon, the cooldown of Feral Spirits is reduced by 1 second. So this is why you will notice in big AoE packs when you're just smashing Lavlash to all heck, you get Feral Spirits back so fast. That is because you're generating such a high amount of Maelstrom Weapon that Feral Spirits is now a 10-second cooldown. So that is why it goes crazy. But you might notice that a lot of people have been running an ability called Flowing Spirits. So this removes the hassle of paying attention to your Feral Spirits, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is being random. And you only summon one Feral Spirit. So the reason why this talent is not prioritized over Ancestry is because the proc chance got nerfed. This used to proc a lot. But it is still good for those that don't wish to deal with Feral Spirits or are not paying attention to it or don't press it enough. It's a very good option, but if you want to go for full optimized build, you're better to go with Witch Doctor's Ancestry so you can control your burst and when you use them, giving you even bigger damage windows because Primordial Storm Doomwinds combos are insane, and if you combo it with Feral Spirits, it's just a 30% damage increase overall. So, what's the final talents that you don't see this season? Well, the first one is going to be Elemental Spirits. What does it do? Well, it changes your spirits to a elemental type, giving you a bonus of 10% to said element. And you have a chance to proc either fire, frost, or lightning. You cannot have all three, but you can have two. So you could get a frost spirit and a fire spirit, or a frost lightning, or two lightning, or two frost, so on and so forth. But it also still increases physical damage by 10%. So you always gain some form of base buff. That is why you'll see it. But then you probably see a secondary option that you've never seen anybody choose, and that is Alpha Wolf. This was brought in back in Legion. So whenever you chain lightning or crash lightning, it causes your feral spirits to pulse AoE. This was really good back in the day because we didn't have much for mass AoE, and also, it was just a nice passive that made Feral Spirits do even more damage. This only deals physical damage, which means it does pair very, very well with the base Feral Spirits because you don't get the option of Elemental Spirits. But at the same time, it just does not do enough damage to warrant the option to take it because everything else is just way more valuable. But yeah, that is why you have feral spirits, is because it buffs everything by 15% each. So you get two of them, which means 30% buff to Primordial Storm and Doomwinds, which is our primary damage dealers, as well as Wind Fury, but that kind of goes with Doomwinds. And then you just constantly generate Maelstrom to reduce its cooldown so fast that it just becomes like a 10-second cooldown in big AoE situations, and more of a 45-second cooldown in single target. And you don't take these because they're just not valuable enough and there's too much RNG, and you're just better off taking a different talent and overall. So on to the next ability, which is going to be our passive, which is Elemental Assault, which actually we won't cover that. That'll be later. So the next one is our big cooldown Ascendance, which you may have noticed in Stormbringer, which let's switch over to that build because this is where we're going to be going more into Storm Strike. So before we get into Ascendance, let's talk about Storm Strike, which isn't technically a talent, but gets modified by a significant amount of ability. So Storm Strike takes our weapons and smashes it against their target, dealing physical damage. What exactly does it do? Despite its name Storm Strike, it only deals physical damage. It does not deal Storm Strike damage, so it doesn't scale with nature. It only scales with physical. But we gain a significant amount of talents, which is Storm Flurry. Storm Strike has a 25% chance to strike the target an additional time for 40% normal damage. This effect can chain off of itself. So this effect technically can chain infinitely. Like you could chain it forever and ever. So I casted it once and I got 2 procs. Cast it again and I got 2 procs. Cast it again and I got 2 procs once again. So you can see it triggers quite often. And there I got 4 procs because I went from 6 to 10. So it can trigger indefinitely. It will go insane, and each one of those strikes has a chance to trigger Wind Fury as well. But then we get into kind of like this weird combo with Crash Lightning. Although this also does kind of buff Lavlash in a way. Crash Lightning causes your Storm Strike, Ice Strike, or Lava Lash to deal additional nature damage in front of you. And then you combo it with Converging Storms, and it's kind of self-explanatory, but it each target increases the damage of your next Storm Strike. So you'll see when you Crash Lightning, you will see you start hitting targets in the back, dealing a little bit of extra nature damage. That's what happens, and that is why. But the Storm Flurries do not trigger the bonus effect. I don't believe. I've never fully tested it out, but who knows? But yeah, that's kind of one of the main reasons why Storm Strike is so powerful is because it triggers it has a chance to trigger indefinitely, causing Wind Fury to go crazy. But then we have Storm Blast, giving us an additional charge of Storm Strike, but also every time we Storm Surge, which is our Storm Strike reset, it causes our next Storm Strike to deal additional nature damage. So you will notice in your top corner, you will see, if we can get it to proc, you will see here that Storm Surge has triggered here. And if we get it to proc once again, you really don't want to proc for me, huh? Uh, of course, when I want it to proc, it does not wish to proc. But that's annoying. So it does not consume, I don't believe it consumes 2 stacks at once, but it will cause your next 2 Storm Strikes to deal nature damage, which is also further increased by Elemental Spirits, which does come into later with Stormbringer. So it does get very, very powerful. But why did we go over Storm Strike before Ascendance? Because Ascendance actually buffs Storm Strike. So let's get into this. So Ascendance causes you to deal massive nature damage right away whenever you trigger it, and reduces the cooldown and cost of Storm Strike by 60%. The cost doesn't really matter. And causes your auto attacks and Storm Strike wind attacks to bypass armor and be a 30-yard range. So this causes you to turn into a range unit. But then we get into further talents, which breaks Ascendance even further to insanity. So, static accumulation, 20% chance to refund Maelstrom weapon stacks spent on Lightning Bolt, Tempest, or Chain Lightning. So, this means whenever you Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, or Tempest, you have a chance to just immediately generate those 10 stacks back, meaning you can just sit there and Lightning Bolt spam all day long if you have good RNG. But also, while Ascendance is activated, you are generating 2 Maelstrom weapon stacks every second. So this means you have a infinite supply of Maelstrom weapon. But you're probably thinking, well, when I'm in Ascendance, I don't want to be casting Lightning Bolt. I just want to spam Storm Strike, don't I? You would be correct. And that's where our final talent comes in, Thorm's Invocation. Increases the damage of Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning by 20% and reduces the cooldown of Ascendance. This also buffs deeply rooted elements, giving it 2 additional seconds. So originally this is, I believe it's 6 seconds, and it goes up to 8. But while in Ascendances, your Wind Strike automatically consumes up to 5 Maelstrom weapon to send in a Lightning Bolt or a Chain Lightning at 100% effectiveness, whichever you have most recently used. So this is why when you ascend, you are just spamming Storm Strike. And you will see it here. I'll go ahead, we Ascendance, and I'm really far away. You can see I'm just auto casting away. And if I Tempest, it auto casts Chain Lightning if you hit multiple targets. And this is one of the things that really annoys me, and if you've caught some of my streams, you've probably heard me talk about it, is I don't like the fact that Tempest changes this. So if you are casting Lightning Bolt and Tempest does cleave, it will automatically cast Chain Lightning afterwards, which is very frustrating, especially if the unit dies. But yeah, That is why you want to just sit there and spam Storm Strike during Ascendance, is because you're automatically casting those lightning bolts and chain lightnings all day, and you don't have to worry about anything else other than Feral Spirits, because Feral Spirits is just going to be ripped off a cooldown thanks to Witch Doctor's ancestry. So you'll just see Feral Spirits going off cooldown super duper fast. But what else gets modified by the hero talents? Well, Tempest, which is our primary thing, gets modified by a whole bunch of stuff. So Stormcaller just increases our damage overall with any nature spell, so that's why nature spells become more beneficial. But then we have Arc Discharge. So Tempest causes your next Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt to be instant cast and deal 40% increased damage while casting the same, or while um, casting it again at the same time. So if I get my Tempest, so I have a Tempest here now. Now I have 10 stacks. I'm going to go ahead and Tempest. Now I got my Arc Discharge buff, right? So it's right there. So you'll see me cast 2 Chain Lightnings at the price of 1. Boom, boom. So you can see that go off. And let's do it again with Lightning Bolt. You can see me cast it. Boom, boom. So it just automatically casts it at the same somewhat value as you had before. You don't really have to worry about it. But then we have Conductive Energy, which you probably noticed some lightning coming from the sky randomly. This is Lightning Rod. So every time you deal damage with Tempest, Lightning Bolt, Elemental Blast, Primordial Wave, or Chain Lightning, you mark the target with Lightning Rod, causing it to take 8% of all damage you deal with Tempest, Lightning Bolt, and Chain Lightning. So if I just sit here and spam, you can see the lightning rod and you will see the lightning come down. And if you're casting chain lightning, it automatically applies to any target with the without lightning rod in the AoE section. So any target it hits, it will apply it. So you can just see, and it's just causing the target to take a little bit of extra damage. This can go up quite a bit when you got 6 or 5 targets, whatever the cap is. I think it's 5. You can get like those 1 million hits with lightning rod to each of those targets. So it does add up quite a bit in AoE. And then we have our rolling thunder, and this causes Tempest to summon a nature spirit, which we talked about over here with elemental spirits. This increases our nature and physical damage. So that's why you'll see feral spirits randomly come up, and you'll have a random blue one when you're staring at them, and they're usually ghostly like blue rather than straight blue. You will see it. So I have a Tempest. You can see me summon my feral spirit. You can see that come out. And then you get like this massive buff. So that further increases the amount of nature damage you're going to do. And that's why I like this build so much, is because it's super easy and it just further increases the longer the fight goes. It's quite insane. But yeah, other than that, I think that's everything. If you were curious, Tempest does funnel all of its damage into that lightning rod, talking about the AoE as well. It takes all of it and amplifies it into one target. But I think that covers all of the talents. If I missed anything or you want me to go over anything, please let me know. I did my best here to try and do this as fast as possible, as well as make it as clear as possible, too. I'm not sure if I covered everything or if everything is perfectly correct. This has just been my experience with all these abilities and how they work. So do keep that in mind. But like I said, please let me know if there's any abilities you want me to go over, or if I missed anything, do let me know, because I will do my best to explain each one of these, because enhancement can be very confusing. But once you understand the abilities, it is very straightforward and easy to get the hang of. But anyways, guys, that is it. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this helps, and I do apologize for how long this video might be. But yeah, anyways, thanks so much. Laters!